Hi, this is Brian Brady. I'm with former Congressman David Bonior, and we are excited to do a follow-up interview with two amazing leaders, military advisors from both Canada and the US that we met in Kyiv a few months ago. And we wanted to interview them about the state of the Russia's war on Ukraine, we should call it. We'll get started here with an intro here. Kevin Leach is the founder and director of Sabre Training Advisory Group, a Canadian Ukrainian nonprofit, which brings NATO veterans to train Ukrainian forces where they are needed most. He is a 10-year veteran of the Canadian Armed Forces and served as an OSCE ceasefire observer in Ukraine from 2018 until the full-scale invasion in February 22. You can find out more about Sabre's work at www.sabretag.org. And married to a Ukrainian and living in Kyiv. So uh, important info. Adnan Rana is a former U.S. Marine officer and drone industry professional who has been volunteering in Ukraine since spring 2022. He is the president of a U.S.-based nonprofit providing critical, commercially available equipment for Ukrainian defenders, and he currently works with Ukrainian companies developing strategic technologies and artificial intelligence and unmanned systems. Yeah, Adnan goes by Audie. So welcome, Kevin and Audie. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I'm going to pass the baton. I'm just the intro guy to the former Congressman Bonior to get the interview going.
Thanks, Brian, and thanks for organizing this. And it's good to see Kevin and Audie again. We were great helpers of us understanding what was happening in Ukraine when we were there this past April, and we actually went out in the field with them and watched the training sessions and learn about the technology, an area that Audie has particular expertise in regarding drones and other mechanisms that are used in this war. So it's good to see them again, see them healthy and active and working. Well, why don't we start with this, and let's start with Kursk, since that's kind of really where a lot of people's heads are anyway today, reading the news. Unexpected, kept a secret, I gather. I'd like to get your thoughts on all of that, how much of a secret it was, and what the prospects might be in the future with regard to the taking of this occupying temporarily, they say, of this land in Russia. There's just considerable amount of land. They say the size of New York City or the Los Angeles, 488,000 square miles. It's quite a large area. So let me begin with maybe Kevin, then I'll go to Audie. Your thoughts about all of this, and if you can incorporate, both of you, the idea of going further. You know, they bombed those 3 bridges that were really critical in terms of supplies and everything, and that could put the Russians in a real box, being encircled on the western side of the river. Your thoughts about all of that and the possibility that might happen. So, Kevin, please, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing maybe that I think is good to talk about is the how secret it was kept. Um, Absolutely nobody, at least nobody I know, knew that this was coming, and that's quite frankly exactly what you want. The there to as kind of like a, I would say, counter example would be last summer's Ukrainian offensive, which had trailers shot for it, Hollywood style, lots of lead up, very very well advertised. This offense is coming, and there are times certainly when that is useful, but by far it's better to do what was done with this, which is don't say anything, don't let the enemy even know you're coming, and then punch through with as much ferocity as you can. And in the opening days, we saw just phenomenal examples of what we call maneuver warfare. So you can again look at this as at the opposite of the positional warfare that has dominated this war so far, with the opposing trench lines and very little movement. This was a lightning attack into Russia, and you saw Ukrainian units were able to move themselves with such speed and coordination that they were surrounding and forcing Russian units into kind of untenable positions. And that's why you'd have these surrenders, 200 Russian soldiers surrendering at once, 300. What I was told from a friend is, and I don't know how true it is, but he had heard that in the opening week, Ukraine took upwards of 2,000 Russian soldiers prisoner, including some of these more, you can't call them elite units, but the more valued units, like the Chechen Akhmat types. It'll be very long to explain why those are more valued, but suffice to say, the Russians trade them back. They trade back multiple numbers of Ukrainian prisoners for one of these Akhmat guys. And it shows there's a lot of implications. It shows the ability for Ukraine to coordinate large-scale operations as long as they've got the manpower and equipment. So that was something that was definitely not thought to be impossible, but a lot of Western authorities were a little shaky in their faith in terms of Ukrainians planning and carrying out operations like these, just because there is a large amount of what I call kind of like legacy Soviet thinking left in the Ukrainian military, and it doesn't really work in that same way. But what we're seeing is that modernization definitely has happened to a certain degree, and it has other implications as well. So the throughout this conflict, or throughout this war, there have been a lot of what are called Russia's red lines. If you do this, then we'll really take the gloves off. If you do this, then we're not, we won't be kidding around anymore. And Russia always kind of gives these vague warnings of don't do this or else. And then one of them has been, if Russian territory is threatened, and they said that, and they also said that with the implication that the territory they claimed in Ukraine equals that Russian territory. Well, unfortunately, that has led to a lot of fear in the West. I think most notably because of the nuclear threat, and everyone's kind of expecting there to be a nuclear explosion. If these red lines are crossed. But what this Kursk invasion shows, or the Kursk operation, maybe better to say, is that we can cross. We've known this here. We can cross the red lines, and the Russians they'll back up to a further back red line and a further back red line. Of course, I think there are real final points where if Moscow was under threat, I don't think that they would be as sanguine and move things back any further. But the point is their border areas now, we've shown, are completely, how should I say, like we can move in there. And it's a bit of a warning to the Russians as well, because it's saying, hey, look, if you have any of your defenses weaker than they need to be, then we'll punch through your own territory and around behind your forces, or something like that. And so in showing that we can cross these red lines safely, I think it's going to take pressure off of Western allies and hopefully open the way for more robust assistance. And not talking about combat forces or anything like that, or even uniformed forces in the country, but just sort of unlocking some of the things that were previously viewed as being too escalatory. So it's a very exciting development. There's other stuff that when we touch on training later on, we can get into and relate back to Kursk. But for now, those are my initial thoughts.
Well, those are the idea of unlocking some of the lines that the West has set in terms of allowing the Ukrainians to use materials from the West to engage the Russians is happening, and how far it will be extended will be interesting. And I think we'll have a new president, so that'll be interesting too to see what happens with regard to that. But Audie, if I could get your impressions real quickly here, why, for instance, didn't the Soviets, Soju where my mind is, why didn't the Russians pick up by way of satellite or drones the convergence of all these Ukrainian troops in the area that went across into Kursk? I mean, what do you think what went on there?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, if you look back to, fall 2021, what it seemed like, US intelligence, Western intelligence services knew for sure that this invasion was going to happen in early 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It's kind of mind-boggling that the Russians were able to just just make such a critical intelligence failure, and not being able to pick up on the fact that Ukrainians were preparing this operation into Kursk. We know they have sensors. We know that they have, drones doing surveillance. We know, they've got human assets around Ukraine. Unfortunately, maybe they just didn't take it seriously. I mean, I'm sure somebody will dig into this someday and find the real, the cause, the analysis, but it is kind of mind-boggling that they weren't able to predict this. And now they're paying the price. But it's like Kevin said. I mean, the foundational concept of maneuver warfare is, avoid an enemy's strengths, exploit their weaknesses, and strike at that critical vulnerability. And they've really demonstrated that these border areas that are away from the front line are extremely vulnerable, and you can just surge 10 to 15,000 Ukrainian troops through. It's pretty wild.
Tell me about your thoughts on the going forward now in, let's say, Kursk, or even in Pokrovsk. Is that how you pronounce it? Pokrovsk? Is that in the Donetsk?
Pokrovsk, yeah.
How will drones continue to play a critically important role in both of those areas, given the warfare? For those who are listening, Pokrovsk is where the Russians are making the big move in Donetsk right now, and they're moving and actually gaining ground and getting closer to Pokrovsk. We're about 8 miles away from the last I read on it, and it's a very important area in terms of strategically, in terms of supplies, logistics. So, what role does this technology that this war has sort of been built around in a lot of ways with drones? What role is drones going to? Do you foresee them playing there as well as in Kursk?
Yeah, I mean, as anyone that's probably watching this knows, because they've demonstrated an interest in this conflict, drones are pretty much the defining weapon system of this war, and they are used everywhere. They're used, on the front to do strikes. They're used on the front to do surveillance. They're used in border areas to do surveillance. Any aspect of this war is going to have the use of small drones on the tactical level employed. I was at a conference in Paris in June, and the chief of the French military said that he didn't foresee drones. He kind of saw this as the twilight of drone employment, and I'm constantly astounded by the disconnect, and I know Kevin feels the same way, the disconnect between Western military and political leadership and what's happening here. This is just the beginning of drones. I mean, we've seen the ability for, individuals with a little bit of money, organizations with a little bit of money, to develop air power, and it's not going away anytime soon. And even if we build counters for it, it's like an arms race. Like, you build a counter for something, and then somebody finds a way to get around it. So drones, to your original question, they're playing a role in both Pokrovsk on the defensive and offensive, and in Kursk for intelligence purposes, as well as strike. And they're not going away anytime soon.
Ryan, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kevin, I clearly remember your expertise is training junior officers, and you've done that in Ukraine, and the importance of that level of authority on the ground, commanding troops and battalions. I shouldn't say anything more military because I know nothing. So I'm just going to pass it to you. Tell us why how that's impacting the Eastern Front where Russia's making progress.
So it's well, first I just want to explain why I brought it up to begin with, or maneuver warfare, and so coordinating, in this case, thousands of soldiers is a very difficult task, and you're not going to do that. You're not going to control these soldiers individually from some command post with a general 50 kilometers behind the what we call the forward edge of battle. You have to have subsidiarity. So the general has his plan, and he's going to give his plan and how he kind of wants it done down to the colonels, and the colonels are going to take that plan. They're going to concoct their own in line with their boss's plan, and it trickles down, and as the plan trickles down levels of authority, it increases in terms of granular detail. And you're then again, that said, though, you're never having these like incredibly precise plans, because if you have an incredibly precise plan and something is out of place, then the whole plan is broken. And where this ties into training junior officers and NCOs, I have to mention, I was enlisted, I was a senior NCO, and so we will have our say. But no,
I was an NCO too, so
excellent.
And so was our new candidate for vice president. He was an NCO.
See, and that's it goes to show you, NCO to leadership, to like real hands-on leadership, I'm going to say here. Not an insult to officers any more than is necessary. But no, when you have reliable junior leaders, you have a much more maneuverable force, because they are trained to react to the reality on the ground, and they are empowered to make decisions based on what they see, and they don't have to go back and be constantly phoning back to the boss and saying, oh, can I do this, can I do this, can I do this? And that only comes through training. There's some people who definitely, they have the idea that you're going to create a soldier with a lot of on-the-job training, but that can work in certain places, but usually you just end up with a very high casualty rate. And so training has to be a big piece of that. And there are times where we see it's to go to Pokrovsk, the Pokrovsk example, the Russians are making that steady progress, and they're doing it through just a bloody push of they have their favorite tactic of putting lines of almost untrained conscripts, and just saying, okay, you march over in that direction toward the enemy and soak up some bullets. And then once they have really expended ammunition or revealed defensive positions, then the actual trained troops will come in and carry out more targeted attacks, and with a higher level of competence. And unfortunately, on our side of things, a lot of the troops that are on our side are not as well trained, and this is not an indictment of the Ukrainian system. It's just when you have to press thousands of people into service, in an emergency situation, it creates a massive backlog. I recently was speaking to an officer who he volunteered in the early days of the invasion, and he has essentially been fighting nonstop until I think last month, and then he was able to rotate back and start getting more formal training. But before that, all he had was what was left over from his initial period of military conscription. And so where we're seeing the areas that Russians are making progress, we're just seeing it's the result of forces that have not been able to sufficiently prepare. They just haven't had that window of of breathing room. And that's why, it's something that's kind of lit a fire under our butts here when it comes to training, because we have the ability to really help build a sustainable Ukrainian-led training capacity. It's a resource question now. And I referenced earlier about governments being worried about what they see as being escalatory actions. When I started Sabre, I thought we would never be acknowledged by a Western government, and I think Audie will probably remember me saying that all the time. And then lo and behold, now I have the defense attaché's phone number, the Canadian defense attaché's phone number, and I have connections at NATO who are like official connections, and they are looking at the opportunities to support training inside the country. So I think really it's just a matter of time, but we have to keep pressing. And this comes into the political side of things. We have to press for not just an expansion of support, but also a way of making sure that the support given to Ukraine is as efficient as possible. And nothing beats training for that. We just to brag a little bit, because I think it's worthwhile. We are in communication with a lot of our former students, and last summer we had 2 months with 100 troops. We got them up to what I can comfortably call a NATO standard in terms of their performance. That includes their NCOs and their junior officers. And they rotated into Serebrynsky Forest, which is it's a very, very hardcore area, lots of fighting. And in their initial rotation, which was roughly 6 months, I'm going to say only here, I don't want to be callous, but it is the reality of kind of the arithmetic of war. In those 6 months, only 6 of those 100 were killed, and their casualty rate was about 30%, which is in the worst cases, that's just 1/3 of the casualty rate of some other units. But even in better units that don't have NATO standard training, that's just half of the casualty rate. And it's not that we did anything magical or out of the ordinary. It's just that basic training, ensuring that your soldiers from the ground up have the skills that you need them to have, will make them more effective, will make them less likely to be harmed, and will ensure that fewer of them are killed. And so we see. I just want to finish this thought, and then I'll cap it off there. But we see an important contrast: the very precise and well-coordinated maneuver warfare in Kursk, and then the more desperate defensive fighting in Pokrovsk. And those show the difference that training makes in terms of coordination.
Good point. Okay, Brian wants to jump in, then we'll go back to Audie, okay, for his observations and thoughts on what's been discussed. Brian.
Yeah, I just have to kind of praise Kevin for his insight. We saw Kevin at the low point of the war when they were running out of supplies in early April, Ukraine was. And Kevin sort of predicted, like, if they can get resupplied by the U.S. aid package and NATO, that Ukraine, because of their culture, they have a cultural advantage of junior officers and NCOs being able to take initiative that the Russians don't have. And if they can get out in the open space, I remember you saying that Ukraine can make some advances. So you called it. I just want you to know, and then Brady giving support. I know you're a nonprofit, so if some of our viewers want to make a donation to help Kevin and his team, that would be great too. And Audie has his own tech team. So Audie, I just want to pass it to you for a while. Technology's really had a huge, the glide bombs from Russia have had a huge impact. The drones, the sea warfare that Ukraine has developed. It seems like technology might be the difference in this war. And then I want to pull back and ask David a little bit political strategy question too about what's the end game here, and ask you guys that question as well. But give us one more brief of the whole theater of war, Audie, from a tech perspective, if you could.
Yeah. I do think technology has the potential to be a huge game changer here. I know Kevin will agree with me when I say that it's always going to come down to people. We are not at a stage where drones or AI can replace an infantryman taking and holding ground. But what we can do is we can maximize the use of technology to enable those soldiers to complete their missions. And there's a lot of different applications for it. Like you said, I mean, look at what Ukrainian unmanned sea vehicles have done to Russian ships in the Black Sea. There's there's very little left, if anybody left at all, sailing around the Black Sea flying a Russian flag. And I think one thing where technology really plays an important role is offsetting critical manpower shortages. We can really use, like, especially, and this is something we really need to learn about in the US and in the West. The Ukrainians are very innovative. They're a very tech forward country. As you guys remember being out here, you can pay for everything on your phone. They're operating on a budget. So they're creating systems that are much more economical than we're building in the US, just for price per unit. And they're creating systems that they're okay losing, because stuff gets lost all the time because of the level of electronic warfare here. And that philosophy where we're not building a $500,000 drone that if we lose, it's a huge loss. We're losing, $1,000 drones. It's a totally different way of approaching this type of war. And if you're in the US or, one of our allies in the Pacific, and you're thinking about what the future fight could be, which is something with China in the Pacific, it's going to be a very similar environment from the perspective of electronic warfare and jamming and the loss of systems. And right now we're not building systems in the US that are frankly meant to be destroyed or that we're okay with losing. And that is very different from the way that they're doing it here. Learning how to maximize each dollar or hryvnia that's going into these systems. And it's a little bit shocking sometimes to talk to US industry and US government people and have them touting, all the accolades of these, super expensive systems that are really great if you're fighting something like counterinsurgency or something maritime, where there's a very low chance of it getting shot down. But those systems are not being purpose built for the war that we're fighting here, which is pure warfare in the 21st century that is highly technological, and electronic warfare is everywhere. And I'm afraid a deep fear of mine is that we're not going to learn this lesson until there's a conflict in the Pacific, and we're losing $500,000 million unmanned systems when we really should be employing 10,000 units of a $1,000 system. It's a philosophy that needs to change, and I hope we can build those systems and that infrastructure in the industry before it's too late.
I'd love to kind of have each of you, and David, you weigh in with your congressional leadership experience. Are we in the fourth quarter of this war? I'm hoping we are. And Kevin's shaking his head no. And what does the invasion of Kursk give us a potential for an end game of a swap of land, et cetera? And what do you, and David, I also want to put you on the spot first, if you don't mind. Just we'll have a new administration, and
Right.
what's going to be the impact?
Well, first of all, you got to have somebody to negotiate with, and if it's Putin and he wants, he's insisting on keeping what he has stolen, it's going to be very difficult to get to the table. Now, there are things that happen. I mean, the war in between Iraq and Iran, I remember that, 10 years, same time length. This war, especially in the East here, 214 it started. So they've been at it 10 years there, 10 years now in Ukraine. And it's a long time, and people get weary, and it's to sustain people's confidences and their psychological stability over that period of time is very, very difficult, and get them to fight. And of course, Ukraine has to deal with manpower mobility issues of serious consequences, although they've made some real steps recently to try to do that. So I think the technology piece, though, that we've been discussing is significant in all of this, and how that's evolved, and how it can throw off, for instance, the Russian Navy, how it can throw off going into Russia and taking the amount of land that the Ukrainians have taken just in the last month here. So I don't think we're at the point now where this war is going to end soon. I regret to say we all want peace. We also want save lives. We don't want to go further than how much has been consumed already, which has been horrific on both sides, but especially the Ukrainians, since they're being aggressed against. What's going to happen from a political standpoint in the United States? We will have a new administration, whether it's a new Democratic president, Madam President, and that whole kind of piece is kind of interesting. The psychology. What does Putin do now he's confronted with a woman? We had a little discussion about that mentality a little earlier before we came on, and that'll probably play a role in all of this as well. Trump says that he can call Putin and they'll settle the war in the first week. I think that's kind of crazy, and it won't happen. So I wouldn't really put more credence into that, or likelihood of that happening. So I kind of, with Kevin, I guess I'm talking. He's shaking his head in terms of he didn't think it was going to end in soon. I kind of agree with him. I don't know where it's going to go from here, but I do know that the NATO and the West are united, which is a huge, huge thing. And it's a hard thing to buck. And at some point, if there are other kind of incursions into Russia along the border, along the line, the extended line, maybe north, it'll be interesting to see how much the Russian people are going to, they had 100,000 people in the street recently when Navalny died. So that's quite a few. It'll be interesting to see what impact that plays as well.
Evan, you both are in Kyiv. What's the political analysis from Kyiv there?
Well, I hesitate to speak for Ukrainians, but at least from this perspective, I don't think that we're near the end. I think maybe we're over the halfway point. The way that I've been expressing it to wherever I can is that I think that everyone has had their 1941 moment where they've looked around and said, okay, this is very serious. We need to be just as serious in our in how we address it, because I've noticed. It was as I said earlier, a year ago, I didn't think we'd be talking to Western governments, and now here we are. And I can only attribute that to them extending themselves and getting more comfortable pushing in here and playing a larger role. And I think it's because the stakes have been upped quite significantly. And then especially with NATO's expanding their office in Ukraine, it's not a secret. They are taking over overall command of assistance to Ukraine, also not a secret. And so the indications are that we're going to start seeing more and deeper support. And or people like us and like myself and Audie, we're here on the ground to help facilitate that, where each of us have a foot in either world and are able to kind of speak across cultures. So it's I don't want to, I certainly don't want to sound doom and gloom. I don't want to be overly optimistic, but I want to say that I think that we are seeing, we have already seen perhaps a good turning point in terms of support for Ukraine and how seriously this is being taken by our NATO allies and others as well, non-NATO allies as well. So uh, to put it very shortly, I don't think that we're near the end quite yet, but I'm mulching my paraphrasing of Churchill, but probably the beginning is over. We've seen the end of the beginning, so time will tell. I am optimistic, but that's in my nature.
Adi?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Not to trash talk my fellow Americans, but I think that there are a lot of Ukrainians who are paying probably closer attention to this election in US politics than a lot of Americans are. Because, this is an existential threat for them, as we all know. And the way that our government responds to this crisis is absolutely critical to the Ukrainians. And I think, like Kevin said, I think we are seeing a lot of support and, or at least gestures of support. And I think this is, we should have been fully supporting the Ukrainians to the every possible extent, 2 years ago. Well, since 2014. But not right now, we are seeing like, look, Russia is not as capable and not as strong as we thought. Look at what is happening in Kursk. They are, I read some Russian media thing on Twitter today or yesterday about how, they're putting out messaging that's like, you just have to get used to the fact that there's going to be Ukrainians occupying Kursk. Like, they do not have an answer to what is happening there now. And if they're weak and they're vulnerable, we need to give the Ukrainians what they need to finish this fight. Otherwise, we can't predict when this is going to end. And, importantly to the rest of the world, if we don't put our foot down and stand up to authoritarianism and end this war and let the Ukrainians win, we're just emboldening people around the world, like, Xi Jinping and Iran. Like, there are other people who are watching this very closely to see how the West and allies around the world are responding to this. And if we respond weakly, they're going to know that they have the ability to molest their neighbors without us stepping in to do the right thing. So yeah.
Can I jump in real
Please.
quick? We're down to 3 minutes to go here in the game in our interview, but I want to do one quick lightning round question for each of you, or you both can chime in. I mean, lightning round rules, 30 seconds or less on the answer. David Bonior, Kamala Harris wins the presidency, and which I think we both think is going to happen. Is she more aggressive than Joe Biden in assistance?
I think so, and we had good assistance. We just have the rules around the assistance that are sometimes the problem. And so, yeah, I think she will be very good on this. I think it's important to remember here as well that there was a lot of, will they get the votes in the Congress? It doesn't look like the Republicans. We got 3/4 of the House and 3/4 of the Senate voted for the aid package.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
there's a lot of support in the country for Ukraine still. And yeah, we went through a weary period, and the Ukrainians have gone through a weary period, but that's war. And but we're fighting for something that's worth fighting for, and that's freedom and it's liberty and all the values that we hold so dear to our hearts. And I think in the end, that goes a long way.
I'm cutting you off because it's lightning round, David. Kevin Leach. Kevin Leach, manpower questions in Pokrovsk. Can Ukraine turn back the Russians before Pokrovsk, or is there just going to be sort of a retreat going on for a few months here?
They definitely can. The key element is getting enough people trained and moved into the area in such a state that they're equipped and ready to act. But the thing with an attack like what the Russians are doing, it is incredibly vulnerable to counterattack. So as soon as we have the forces in the area that can get around them and behind them, they will overextend themselves and they will be caught. So definitely they can be pushed back.
Oh, good. Audie, Kursk, in 6 months from now, will Ukrainians have expanded their footprint, held their footprint there, or retreated from their footprint?
Yeah, that's hard to say. I think that I don't know if they plan to be there to stay, but I think that they're going to be there for a while. Right now, we are, the Russians have been slow to pull reinforcements from other parts of the front in Ukraine, and the fact that they're putting out messaging saying get comfortable with Ukrainians being here, who knows? Maybe Kevin has a better idea, but I don't think we could really predict.
This is I appreciate you all. Can we do a quick pitch for each of your nonprofits before we sign off? And David, you'll do the thank and the wrap. But Kevin, you want to go first for your nonprofit?
For sure. Yeah. So we are Saber Training Advisory Group. It's exactly what it says on the tin. We advise training. So that includes bringing instructors here to teach Ukrainians directly. And even better, what we're working on building now is training Ukrainian, junior Ukrainian leaders, as we said before, NCOs and junior officers, and equipping them to be instructors so that we are building up the local Ukrainian capacity to train themselves in a way that is interoperable with NATO forces. So
And we saw your team, and they work very. It's a lot of they're a great team you got there, and a few thousand goes a long way to staffing and supplying those guys because they're also living off their military pension, so they don't need to be paid at a super high level, right?
That's it. All of the money that we take in currently, all the donor funds, they go straight to fuel, food, and accommodations, and really nothing else. And as you said, a few $1,000s really does go a long way. We sustained ourselves on a single, very generous donation through the summer, and still are. So we can really make everything stretch because we're here for the right reasons. We're not here to collect a paycheck or something. Although I would like one.
Someday we'll get you there. Audie, quick pitch for your nonprofit.
Yeah, my nonprofit's called Aerial Relief Group. We provide drones and other type of commercially available equipment, medical equipment for Ukraine. But I'm actually going to plug Saber as well. This is a super critical time for training as we see kind of dynamism increase across the entire battlefield. And with new recruits coming in, you cannot do wrong by donating to training right now. I think that's absolutely critical.
And can I just say a word as well? Let me just thank all the people who have donated for our last conversation we've had with you, and it made a difference. And we want to thank them. Some of them were their individual contributions, and some of them were pretty substantial. And we thank people for coming forward and doing that. It means a lot. It tells me where your values are, and it's needed, as you just heard. So thank you, donors, and thank you, Kevin and Audie.
And I'm looking forward to our last show when Ukraine wins this war with you guys and hearing about the post-war victory plans. So thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Adnan, and also David. Thanks for being such a champion for Ukraine. Hope to talk again soon with more victorious news.
Ryan, we'll film the last episode, the victory episode in Kyiv, all right?
That's it. Yes.
We'll have a live event
over drinks, right?
Oh,
for sure.
I couldn't say that. All right. Thank